The smell hit me first. It always does in these cases, but this one was different. Standing in front of that ordinary suburban home in Norwood Park Township, just outside of Chicago, I couldn't yet comprehend what that sickly sweet odor truly meant. December 1978. The air was bitter cold, but that smell, it was something else entirely. Something no detective ever gets used to, no matter how many crime scenes they've processed. I'd been a criminal investigator for 15 years by then, but nothing prepared me for what we'd find beneath the floorboards of John Wayne Gacy's house. 33 bodies. 33 young men and boys who had walked into this house and never walked out. And the man responsible? He wasn't some menacing figure lurking in shadows. He was a respected businessman. A political activist who had been photographed with the First Lady. A neighborhood fixture who volunteered at the local hospital, entertaining sick children as Pogo the Clown. How could someone live such a perfect double life? The friendly clown bringing joy to children on weekends, while his crawl space became a makeshift cemetery for young men. That question has haunted me for over 4 decades. I've spent most of my career trying to understand the darkness hiding behind that painted smile. Because the scariest monsters aren't the ones hiding under your bed, they're the ones hiding in plain sight, wearing a costume of normalcy that fools us all. The investigation began with the disappearance of 15-year-old Robert Piest, a bright kid with a promising future. His mother was picking him up from his job at a pharmacy when he told her he needed to talk to a contractor about a potential summer job. That contractor was John Wayne Gacy. Robert walked out to speak with him, and was never seen alive again. When we started looking into Gacy's background, red flags appeared. A prior conviction in Iowa for sodomy with a teenage boy. Complaints from young men who worked for his construction company about sexual advances. But on paper, he looked like a model citizen, successful business owner, active in local politics, generous with his time for charity events. The kind of guy neighbors would describe as he'd give you the shirt off his back. The search of his house started as routine. We were looking for any evidence connected to Robert Piest. But then came that smell from the crawl space. I remember the moment one of our team members broke through the concrete floor. The odor became overwhelming. We found the first body within hours. By the time we finished, 29 young men and boys had been recovered from beneath that house. 4 more were pulled from the Des Plaines River. Most of the victims were between 14 and 21 years old. Young men looking for work, runaways, hitchhikers, the vulnerable ones, the forgotten ones. Kids whose disappearances didn't make headlines. Some families had been searching for years, while others didn't even know their sons were missing. Many of the bodies were too decomposed for identification. Some victims remained unnamed for decades, only identified years later through advances in DNA technology. I still remember the faces of the parents who came to identify their missing sons. The hope in their eyes when they arrived, still clinging to the possibility of a mistake. And then the moment when hope collapsed into grief. I've witnessed countless tragedies in my career, but nothing compared to watching a mother realize her son had spent years decomposing in the crawl space of a man who dressed as a clown on weekends. John Wayne Gacy was born in 1942 in Chicago to an alcoholic father who regularly beat him and a mother who tried but failed to protect him. From childhood, Gacy craved approval but received only criticism and abuse. His father called him a sissy, worthless, stupid. Words that cut deeper than the physical violence. Whenever young Gacy showed any interest or talent, his father made sure to crush it. At age 11, Gacy suffered a head injury when a swing hit him, leading to blackouts throughout his teenage years. He also endured sexual abuse from a family friend, something he never reported. These early experiences don't excuse what he became, but they offer glimpses into the formation of a monster. As a young man, Gacy seemed to be overcoming his troubled childhood. He married, had children, and managed a Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise in Iowa. He was active in local civic organizations, even winning the title of Outstanding JC of the Year. People described him as ambitious, hardworking, eager to please, but beneath that facade, something dark was growing. His first marriage collapsed after his arrest for sodomizing a teenage boy in Iowa in 1968. He served 18 months of a 10-year sentence before being released on good behavior. He returned to Chicago, remarried, and started his own construction business. Few people in his new community knew about his criminal past. He rebuilt his reputation as a dedicated community member, even creating his clown persona, Pogo, to entertain at children's hospitals and charity events. I've seen photos of Gacy as Pogo, the exaggerated smile painted onto his face, the colorful costume. He designed his own makeup, deliberately making his smile turn down at the corners instead of up. "Clowns can get away with murder," he once joked to a friend. In retrospect, the comment reveals a chilling truth. His clown persona wasn't just a hobby, it was another mask to hide behind, another way to appear harmless and trustworthy. His second marriage eventually fell apart too. His wife noticed disturbing behaviors, mood swings, strange phone calls at night, mysterious absences. She found gay pornography and men's wallets hidden around the house. When she confronted him, his rage was terrifying. After their divorce in 1976, Gacy's killing spree accelerated. Without the pretense of family life to maintain, the monster had fewer restraints. Most of Gacy's victims were young men looking for work. He would cruise the streets of Chicago, particularly around the Greyhound bus station, offering jobs in his construction business. Others he met through legitimate business connections. He targeted vulnerable youth, those estranged from family, struggling financially, or just passing through town, people less likely to be immediately missed. I interviewed several young men who had worked for Gacy and escaped. They described his methods. First the job offer, then an invitation to his house. There'd be drinks, sometimes drugs, conversations that gradually turned sexual. If they refused his advances, most were allowed to leave, though often without the pay they'd earned. But for those who stayed, things could turn deadly. Timothy McCoy was likely Gacy's first victim in 1972. A 16-year-old traveling from Michigan to Nebraska, he had a layover in Chicago. Gacy offered him a place to stay for the night. The next morning, according to Gacy's later confession, he awoke to find McCoy standing over him with a kitchen knife. Gacy claimed he stabbed the boy in self-defense, only realizing afterward that McCoy had been preparing breakfast and holding the knife for cooking. After killing him, Gacy said he experienced a mind-numbing orgasm. It was the beginning of a 6-year murder spree. I spoke with David, one of the few who encountered Gacy and lived. He was 17 when Gacy picked him up at the bus station, offering him $80 to help move some furniture. At Gacy's house, after a few beers, Gacy suggested they could play a game and showed him a pair of handcuffs, demonstrating how he could escape from them using a trick. When David agreed to be cuffed, Gacy revealed there was no trick. The handcuffs were real and the game was only beginning, David told me, his voice still shaking years later. David was one of the lucky ones. He managed to break free and escape through a bathroom window. Others weren't so fortunate. Gacy's method evolved into what he called the rope trick. After handcuffing his victims, he would place a rope around their necks, inserting a stick through the loop and slowly twisting it tighter until they lost consciousness. Often, he would sit on their chests, reading from a Bible or reciting the 23rd Psalm as they died. Some victims were buried while still alive but unconscious. Gacy later recalled hearing muffled sounds from the crawl space at night, the final gasps of his victims slowly suffocating under the earth. He seemed undisturbed by these memories during interviews, describing his crimes with the detachment of someone recounting a mundane home improvement project. Between his first and last murders, Gacy maintained his public persona flawlessly. He hosted large neighborhood parties in his backyard directly above where many victims were buried. He took photos with politicians, including First Lady Rosalind Carter in 1978, just weeks before his arrest. At one point, he even volunteered to search for a missing boy who, unknown to the search party, he had already murdered and buried beneath his house. What struck me during our investigation was how compartmentalized Gacy's mind seemed to be. In police interviews after his arrest, he referred to an alter ego he called Jack, who committed the murders while John remained unaware. Jack did bad things, he told us during one interrogation, speaking about himself in the third person. Most psychologists dismiss this as an attempt to establish an insanity defense, but after spending hundreds of hours interviewing him, I sometimes wondered if he genuinely believed his own delusion. The most disturbing aspect of the case wasn't just the number of victims, but how Gacy integrated his murderous activities into his everyday life. He would kill a young man in his house, then hours later host a political fundraiser in the same rooms. One victim was still alive in the attic, bound and gagged, while Gacy hosted his mother for dinner downstairs. The contrast between his public face and private horrors seemed impossible, yet he maintained this double life for years. Robert Piest's disappearance finally brought Gacy's crimes to light. Unlike many of his victims, Robert came from a stable family who immediately reported him missing. They provided police with clear information about his last known whereabouts and his mention of meeting a contractor. When detectives ran a background check on Gacy and discovered his prior conviction in Iowa, the pieces began falling into place. I was there when we executed the search warrant on Gacy's house. The initial search revealed nothing suspicious on the main floors. But when officers noticed that foul smell and began investigating the crawl space, the house of cards collapsed. Faced with mounting evidence, Gacy confessed, famously telling us, "There are bodies all over the place." The excavation of the crawl space took weeks. The soil was so contaminated with decomposition that officers could only work in short shifts before the nausea and psychological toll became overwhelming. We recovered 29 bodies, with Gacy occasionally offering suggestions about where particular victims might be buried. He seemed almost helpful, as if he were assisting with a community project, rather than the excavation of his personal graveyard. The trial began in February 1980. I testified about the search and the recovery of the bodies. Throughout the proceedings, Gacy appeared remarkably calm, sometimes smiling or joking with his attorneys. When the families of victims were testifying, he would stare at them without emotion. The disconnect was chilling. Either he was a masterful actor or genuinely devoid of empathy. His defense team attempted an insanity plea, arguing that Gacy suffered from multiple personality disorder. They brought in psychologists who testified that the abuse he suffered as a child, combined with his head injury, had fragmented his personality. But the prosecution countered with evidence of Gacy's methodical planning, his efforts to conceal evidence, and his ability to function normally in society, all indicating that he knew exactly what he was doing and understood it was wrong. After a 5-week trial, the jury deliberated for only 1 hour and 50 minutes before finding Gacy guilty of 33 counts of murder. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection. As the verdict was read, Gacy showed no reaction. No remorse, no anger, no fear, just a blank stare, as if the proceedings concerned someone else entirely. Gacy spent 14 years on death row, during which time he became an amateur artist, painting clown portraits that sold to true crime collectors. He gave numerous interviews, alternately confessing to the crimes and claiming innocence. He wrote letters to thousands of pen pals, sometimes threatening, sometimes charming. He never expressed genuine remorse for his victims. I visited him in prison several times, hoping to understand what drove him. During our final conversation, just weeks before his execution, I asked if he had any regrets. He looked at me with those empty eyes and said, "The only thing I regret is not killing enough of them." Then he smiled, the same smile I'd seen in photos of Pogo the Clown. In that moment, the mask slipped completely, revealing the void behind it. On May 10th, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center. His final words were reportedly, "Kiss my ass." Outside the prison, crowds cheered when his death was announced. But for the families of his victims, and for those of us who had worked the case, there was no real closure, only questions that would never be fully answered. Years later, we're still identifying some of Gacy's victims through advances in DNA technology. As recently as 2021, Francis Wayne Alexander was identified as one of the previously unnamed bodies from the crawl space. For 45 years, his family had wondered what happened to him after he disappeared in 1976. Science finally gave them an answer, though hardly the one they had hoped for. What haunts me most about the Gacy case isn't just the brutality of the murders or even the number of victims. It's how effectively he blended into society, how thoroughly he deceived everyone around him. The neighbor who shoveled your driveway without being asked, the businessman active in local politics, the clown who made children laugh at the hospital. That's the truly terrifying part, the monster hiding in plain sight, wearing a costume of normalcy that fooled us all. I've spent decades studying criminals, trying to identify what separates them from the rest of us. But cases like Gacy's blur those comfortable distinctions. When I look at photos of him performing as Pogo, surrounded by smiling children, I'm reminded that the line between humanity and monstrosity might be thinner than we care to admit. We all wear masks of one kind or another. The question is, what lies beneath yours?